Not long ago, my life turned upside down. I know it's not over, that sooner or later it will come back. Maybe in a month, maybe in a year, 10, 100 years. It doesn't matter. But one day, events will repeat themselves, and I won't have the opportunity to stop it. Now, I had to sacrifice everything I had to make it go away. It calmed down for a while. It fed. But now I'm doomed to spend the rest of my days here. Soft white walls, a monotonous room 2 by 2 meters, a rusty cot with a dilapidated mattress. Fierce looks from people who should be taking care of me, but instead, daily beatings, bullying, and a wild desire to tear me apart because of what I did. If I were in their shoes, perhaps I would behave the same way. But no one knows what really happened. Now no one, except me. They don't understand that I had no other choice. By doing what I did, I saved a huge number of human lives from agonizing, horrible death, even though it was at too high a cost. Today marks the second week of my stay here. Usually my hands are tightly bound with straps, but today is a special day. Accompanied by 2 brutes, a man entered my isolation cell, a man whom I once greeted with a handshake, spent evenings with in a bar, and revealed seemingly the darkest and most tangled affairs. We used to be good friends, despite his status as a chief and me as a subordinate. He didn't take his eyes off me. There was no hint of fear in his gaze, only sadness. Stepan Viktorovich was not a stupid man, quite the opposite. His ingenuity and critical thinking led him to become the chief investigator of particularly serious crimes. But now he looked tired and devastated. It was evident that he had spent more than one night cuddled up with a bottle of something strong. Despite the objections of the staff of this facility, Stepan Viktorovich asked to leave us alone. One stern look from him was enough to make even those healthy foreheads leave the room. He sat on a stool provided by a nurse. Hunched over, resting his forearms on his thighs, he lowered his gaze. He clearly didn't know how to start the conversation. Taking out a notebook and pen from his pocket, he handed them to me, saying, "I want you to describe everything to me from the very beginning. All the events that happened from the moment you received this damned case. We have a few hours, so you don't have to rush. I need to know everything, every detail, every little thing. I don't want to believe that for so many years, I worked side by side with a true beast in human form." I took the notebook and nodded silently. At first, I hesitated to write a single word, but eventually, I found a starting point. It was a Monday. As usual, the hardest working day. Late autumn outside, already chilly. Gray sky, long fallen leaves, and puddles covered with a thin layer of ice. All this didn't add to the mood on this already lazy day when you just wanted to bury yourself under the blanket and sleep the whole day. Yes, this Monday was indeed very difficult. Not so much physically, but mentally and morally. It all started with the fact that myself and my 2 colleagues, Elena and Sergei, were summoned to the boss's office for a very important matter. Entering the office, we sat in chairs and waited for explanations as to why we were called here. Stepan Viktorovich was excessively gloomy and grim. He threw a folder on the table and, without saying a word, rubbed his eyes to relieve some tension. "Do we need to familiarize ourselves with this?" I asked. "It's my fault for not giving you this case right away. I thought the second department could handle it. Gotta give the newcomers a chance to show themselves. Open it up and take a look," the boss said, still not lifting his head. I opened the folder and began to study the material. The thing was that for the past couple of weeks, gruesome murders had been happening in the city. There were 3 bodies found in total, and from the very first one, I felt a sharp unease, and reading further only made me more uncomfortable. As it turned out, a middle-aged man was found in his own apartment. Completely naked, he was literally nailed to the wall with huge nails through his hands and feet. One of the nails was also driven through the victim's head into the wall. A huge piece of skin from the chest was cut out and served as a lining for a small box standing on the table. Inside were the man's genitals and a small blade, which, apparently, was used to operate on him. The number 1 was painted on the abdomen in black paint. The call to emergency services came late in the evening, The police arrived about 20 minutes later, but there was no killer at the scene. There is a possibility that he himself dialed the number and then fled. The neighbors were all pensioners. No one saw or heard anything. During the search, numerous tapes with adult material, a whole closet of erotic toys, and the owner of the apartment's diary were found. In it, he described how he observed unfamiliar people and even children, later photographing and filming them for his own, only understandable to him, personal purposes. With the other two victims, things were no better. Another younger man with obvious signs of obesity was found in his own garage. The garage cooperative was located near a strip of forest, so there were no witnesses to rely on. The man's body was sprawled on the floor in a pool of his own blood. His huge belly was filled with all sorts of trash and neatly sewn up in the middle. His intestines were missing. In the stiffened hand of the man was a soda can, and his mouth was torn from placing a huge red apple inside. The number 2 was drawn on the garage door, also in black paint. No evidence or leads were found. The third and final victim of this case was a young woman. She was found a couple of days ago in one of the dumpsters. The workers who came to collect the garbage did not immediately understand what was happening when such a scene appeared before them under the stinking bags. The body of the 25-year-old girl was at the bottom of the bin, covered with dirty rags. Death occurred as a result of massive blood loss. Her eyes were gouged out with a sharp object, and in their place, 2 large coins were inserted. Severed arms up to the elbows were lying in one of the garbage bags. They were adorned with gold rings with precious stones, various bracelets, and other accessories. Later, the identity of the deceased was established. The girl was involved in organizing bets, underground games, and had connections to the precinct for fraud. On the container where the body was found, as on the previous crime scenes, there was a number. It's not hard to guess that it was the number 3. I handed the folder to my colleagues and sighed heavily. "So we have some kind of psycho on our hands who numbers his victims?" I asked the chief. "It's not that simple. Take the case and reread it a few more times. A certain picture will emerge. Think about it. Firstly, 2 out of 3 victims were connected to breaking the law. The first one was some kind of deranged pervert. Look at all the materials and things we seized from his apartment. The last girl was involved in some shady schemes, leaving people who fell for this scam with no money. The only thing we found on the second guy was nothing. No connections to the precinct or any violations behind him. Secondly, why does this bastard draw numbers after each murder? Maybe he's keeping some kind of count. We'll need to figure that out. And thirdly, did you notice how regularly these murders happen? Exactly 3 days passed between the first and the second, just like between the second and the third. And you know what the problem is? Today is the 3rd day since the last victim died, which means someone else has to die tonight. We've already ordered police patrols all over the city. The public has been informed about the killer. Curfew is in effect starting today. This has never happened in these parts before. So, take the case and familiarize yourself with it again in detail. It's yours now. The 3 of you will work on it together. Report to me every day. If you find anything, call me anytime and report immediately." "I understand," I said to the boss and headed back to my office. By the end of the workday, all the materials had been read dozens of times over. I racked my brains, trying to find a connection between the 3 deceased. Something told me that these were not just random murders. There definitely had to be some meaning behind it all, considering that the maniac was keeping track of his victims and wanted us to count along with him. At the station, there were almost no people left at that time. I also didn't want to stay late and headed home, taking everything I needed with me. I could barely fall asleep that night. Thoughts kept swirling in my head, painting those horrifying pictures. Eventually, I managed to drift into a shallow, intermittent sleep towards dawn. When I woke up by the alarm clock at 6:30 in the morning, I felt like a wilted vegetable. I took a shower, drank a cup of coffee, and headed to work. I was eager to find out how the night had gone and if anything had been discovered. Arriving at the department, I first went to my colleagues and asked if there were any progress. I think you'd better find out from Viktorovich, said Sergei, pursing his lips. It seemed like there was nothing good to expect, I thought. On my way to the chief's office, I met Alina. So, how's it going? Is everything really bad? I asked. It couldn't be worse. Another murder. Before you go in, just know that he's not in a good mood today. Because there's been no progress in the case, he's being pressured from above to take immediate action. I just came from there, said Elena, patting me on the shoulder. There was nowhere to escape. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Stepan Viktorovich was standing motionless by the window, talking to someone on the phone. Yes, I understand. We are doing everything we can. I've handed the case over to the specialists. We'll get to the bottom of this in the next few days. He calmly finished the conversation and hung up. Then he turned to me. You're already aware, right? Stepan Viktorovich asked. Well, I don't know the details. Just that someone else was killed last night, I replied. The chief sighed, then continued. Towards dawn, they found a body at the edge of the forest. His wife found him. Their house was nearby. The poor guy's hands and legs were twisted backward. An inverted cross was driven into his forehead, and he was hanging from one of the trees. They found a note in his pocket. Guilty are those hands that do not work. Weak are those legs that do not walk. They've already sent the note for examination. According to the wife, the old man hadn't done anything for a couple of months. He drank and lay on the couch. He quit his job. She tried to cope with him as best she could, but one evening, he went out for a smoke and never came back. She went looking for him in the morning, and there was the body. She felt unwell and was taken to the hospital. As you probably guessed, the tree was marked with the number 4. Well, that's something. This bastard isn't just a sick psychopath, he's also some kind of sect follower, I concluded, pondering. Why kill a person just because they're doing nothing? And the second victim. A lonely, overweight man who hadn't done anything wrong either. My thoughts raced through my head at lightning speed. The first one, a pervert and sexual maniac. The second, just an ordinary couch potato. Then a swindler hunting for money. And finally, the old man, a layabout living off the old lady. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it hit me. Overwhelmed by emotions, I almost fell off my chair. Stepan Viktorovich, I've solved the puzzle, I exclaimed. The chief looked at me incredulously, clearly disappointed in everything and not expecting anything good. What? What is it? He asked. Look, this maniac fancies himself as God and punishes people for their sins. That's the most logical explanation for what's been happening. The victim's number symbolizes one of the 7 deadly sins. The first 4 victims are literally the embodiments of lust, gluttony, greed, and sloth. I blurted out. Stepan Viktorovich scratched his chin, pondering my theory. He slowly sat down in his chair and stared off into space. After about 15 seconds, looking up at me, he said, "You're just like Sherlock. I wasn't wrong to entrust you with this case, and if your theory is correct, he's planning at least 3 more murders. Wrath, envy, and pride." After the conversation with the chief, I headed to Elena and Sergei to give them instructions on how we would proceed. Elena, I want you to review the materials of each murder once again. Try to gather more information about the victims and see if you can identify any pattern in the chosen crime scenes. Maybe we can predict where the next murders will take place. And Sergei, you'll be working side by side with me now. I need someone who can watch my back in case anything happens, I concluded. Unfortunately, after a couple of days of work, we hadn't made any progress in identifying this bastard. The intervals between the murders were the most challenging times for us in our search. The killer simply vanished during these periods, as if he disappeared into thin air, only to resurface and attack people successfully a few days later. We all understood that if this continued, it would inevitably attract media attention, and then things would get even worse. Besides, a number of questions were bothering me for which I simply couldn't find answers. How did he manage to remain unnoticed? Not a single clue or piece of evidence except those intentionally left by him. And on top of it all, such gruesome murders. It seemed as though the maniac intended to leave his mark on history, so he could be compared to the infamous Chikatilo. It was clear that we had already figured out why and according to what criteria the victims were killed, but how could anyone know about it? If we assume that the killer easily found the swindler and the fat man, how do we explain the other murders? It seemed like this person must have known about the disgusting deeds of the first victim. But how could anyone possibly know what was happening in the lives of some pensioners? Did the maniac meticulously and extensively observe people before choosing them as victims? And the deceased were absolutely unrelated. Among them, there were no relatives, friends, or even acquaintances. All of this led us to a dead end. In such futile searches, we spent several days until another murder occurred, the fifth in the series. But this time, everything was different. We obtained much more information than before, all because there was a survivor. And what he told us only dug us deeper into the pit. The witness turned out to be a young guy, just 18 years old. And here's what he said next. My friend and I went for a walk that evening. We were just sitting at home before, but then we decided we needed some fresh air. We headed to our park. It was dark, but the streetlight still illuminated the path somewhat. We didn't pay much attention to what was happening around us. We were talking about our own stuff. My buddy had just had a fight with his girlfriend not long before that. He's always been hot-headed, but that evening he was just seething with anger. He was cursing her up and down. That's what we mostly talked about. We knew those places like the back of our hand. We were walking along when my friend stopped me, pointing into the distance. There, under the dim light of a lantern, someone was standing. Because of the distance and the darkness, the figure appeared completely black, and only the outlines were visibly. The stranger stood right in the middle of the road, facing us. It was a bit strange and even creepy. There were no movements from his side. He just stood there. He was wearing a long coat that almost reached the ground and a large hat. To avoid any trouble, we decided to turn around and head back towards the park exit. About 100 meters ahead, we saw the same silhouette again, still standing motionless and seemingly looking in our direction. Instinctively, I even turned around, feeling bewildered. Before I could fully grasp the situation, Yegor, my friend, hands in his pockets, walked toward the stranger. I knew what was about to happen, given his nervousness and recent events. There would be a fight, and this guy would get a beating. I went after him to stop Yegor. He was walking and muttering to himself. What, you got nothing better to do? Decided to crack some jokes? I'll come over and we'll laugh together. However, as I approached, he stopped almost immediately, and then he began to slowly step back. Without fully realizing my actions, I also stood frozen about 10 meters away from my friend. Suddenly, the silhouette shifted and started approaching. Then, abruptly, next to Yegor, it grabbed him by the neck and lifted him slightly off the ground. That's when my knees started to tremble. You can imagine the strength needed to lift someone with just one hand. Despite this, I rushed forward to help my friend. But as soon as I got closer, whatever was there tossed Yegor aside as if he were a rag doll. I was petrified with horror, and all my courage vanished in an instant. Then, the iron grip of this creature got hold of me. Yes, indeed, a creature. Because calling it a human was difficult. Its hat covered half of its face, leaving only the mouth visible, which stretched into a terrifying grin. I could barely breathe, and then it raised its head, staring straight into my soul. It had black eyes, as dark as the night sky, absolutely black, without iris or pupil. Its lips were the same color. Its skin was chalky white. It had a long, sharp nose and equally sharp, dirty teeth. It seemed like it was trying to discern something in me, continuously staring into my eyes. After some time, this monstrosity lost interest in me. I fell to the ground, trying to catch my breath, while also experiencing bouts of heavy coughing. When I came to my senses and was able to stand up, neither he nor my friend's body was there. I got up and ran away from there, and when I reached the road, I immediately called the police. The guy finished. A silence hung in the room. I desperately wanted to light a cigarette, even though I had quit smoking a couple of years ago. It was decided to let the teenager go. after taking his contact information and asking him not to leave town for a while. The ravings about the creature's terrifying appearance were dismissed as wild imagination and the result of the blow to the victim's head. But everyone who was familiar with the case had doubts deep down. It was evident from the tense and sometimes frightened faces of the employees. Elena was assigned with paperwork and reports, while Sergei and I were supposed to take a few more people from the department and go search for the missing boy's body. To cut a long story short, surprisingly, the body was not found that day, or even the next. And for the entire following week, there were no murders in the city. Our heads were ready to explode like popcorn. When dealing with the higher-ups, we just shrugged. No one knew what had happened or what would happen next. Was the maniac finally satiated and resting? Or perhaps he was preparing something truly monstrous, making all the previous nightmares seem like child's play. Nevertheless, there was a small glimmer of hope that it was all over. It was not so much hope as it was simply a desire to forget everything that had happened like a terrible dream and move on. During the time I worked on this case, my physical and mental health deteriorated significantly. Sleepless nights, lack of proper nutrition, the nerve-wracking atmosphere, and obsession with what was happening all took a toll on me. The killer seemed to have taken up residence in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about him. His image haunted me in my nightmares, making it difficult to get even a couple of hours of sleep each day. At first, it was driven purely by adrenaline and a desire to punish this monster for everything he had done. But then, it turned into psychosis and obsession. I was constantly searching for information, connections, and leads. My colleagues at work looked at me askance, repeatedly inquiring about my condition. But I lied, saying everything was fine. The lull persisted until one of my working days when I discovered a package in my office. A small box sat on my desk. There was no doubt it belonged to me. The recipient line indicated my name and surname. The tension intensified as I noticed a few small red drops on its backside. It was terrifying to open it, but at the same time, curiosity was gnawing at me. Finally, I decided to open the package, and what I saw inside made my head spin, and I nearly lost consciousness. Leaving several crimson stains on the inside of the box, there lay 3 severed human fingers, each clearly belonging to different people. One was obviously feminine, while the other 2 were masculine. But that wasn't all I discovered. Each finger had numbers neatly carved into them, in order, 5, 6, and 7. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. These were the last 3 victims. Now the killer's tally stood at 7, the same number as the deadly sins in religious teachings. Yes, that's right. But why did I receive this package? He's toying with me. He knows about my obsession. Why did we only learn about the last 3 murders now? Maybe we simply hadn't found the bodies, or perhaps he did it deliberately to execute his sinister plan before he was caught. I had gotten too close to the truth, but I only fully understood everything now, when it was too late. I dropped my head into my hands, resting my elbows on the table. A smirk involuntarily formed on my face. He outplayed me. It was all a devilish game, and I had been defeated. The bastard turned out to be more cunning. With these thoughts, I quickly gathered my things, hiding the box in the closet, and left the station, informing my superiors that I was feeling extremely unwell. The reason for my haste was a piece of paper also found in the box. It simply said, "Soon." I didn't tell anyone about the discovery because it would be extremely difficult to explain how this package ended up in the office, which only I had keys to. I couldn't even share it with Sergei. In the end, I made an unexpected decision for myself, to go to the local old woman who was either a fortune teller or a witch. Once, this old woman was involved in a case we handled. The neighbors called the police, reporting that the old lady had gone mad and was behaving erratically. We went there, questioned the neighbors, and then the old lady herself, but we didn't find anything illegal in her actions. So we left with nothing. Now I was racing to the same address, hoping that she was okay and that she could help me. I had never believed in anything like this before, and even scorned people who believed that mysticism and psychics surrounded us. But now everything had changed. After everything that had happened, I was ready to believe in anything. Arriving at the scene, I immediately found the right house. Not much had changed here. After knocking, I listened carefully to see if anyone was home. After a couple of minutes, I heard quiet, slow footsteps coming from inside the house, approaching me. The door swung open, and on the threshold stood the same old woman. Strangely, her appearance was vividly imprinted in my memory, as if I had seen her many times before. She looked the same as last time, even though several years had passed since our meeting. Definitely a witch, I thought. The old woman recognized me, a smug grin appearing on her face. "So you've come?" she said. "How? Were you expecting me?" I asked in surprise. "Yes, I felt your visit coming soon. I even know why you're here. But it's too late, the ritual has already been completed." I was stunned by what I heard. Could she really be more than just a crazy old lady? Although that's why I came here, to find out. "What ritual? Can you help me and explain what's supposed to happen? And does it have to do with me?" I blurted out. "Not just with you. What will be released from the depths of hell itself tonight doesn't care who it kills. It just wants to claim as many sinful souls as possible. And as you understand, my dear, we're all sinners." "I don't understand. How is that even possible? Who was that monster we were all hunting in the department? Is he responsible for everything?" I persisted. "I'll tell you the basics, as there's no point in delving deeper. I've been involved in this since I was young. It's passed down the female line in our family. From grandmother to mother, and from mother to me. Now, listen." At that moment, the old woman swallowed and began her tale. "The one you were so diligently hunting is none other than a true degenerate, a servant of the devil himself. His task is to open the gates and release into our world that which cannot be spoken of. From the beginning, you never stood a chance of catching him. He cannot be tricked or tracked. When the ritual is complete, he returns back to the realm of the dead, leaving no trace. However, afterward, something even more terrifying and cruel remains on Earth. A real demon, which every 100 years claims an incredible number of human souls. There are two ways to get rid of him. Either wait until the creature is satiated and returns to its realm, or make a sacrifice. It will only leave for a while if satisfied with the sacrifice. To ensure everything goes well, a trio of sinful female souls is needed. It just so happens that women, by their nature, are weaker, making their torment and agony much sweeter for such entities. The hearts of the unfortunate must be presented in a special way as an offering, or else the person performing the ritual risks angering the demon, who will not only take their soul but a couple of hundred others as well. Then, the old woman told me all the details of the ritual. Afterward, she continued, "At one time, hundreds of human souls were ransomed from this creature, and at another, they spared no young girls. They would gather the most promiscuous from the entire village and sacrifice them against their will. Initially, the demon can only take those who believe in him. Once you tell someone about him, and they believe, that's it. You'll postpone your death by a day, passing the curse to the one you told. But over time, the creature feeds and gains strength. Then, it's not necessary to believe in it. Just hearing about it or reading about it is enough. Tonight, you can sleep peacefully. He'll come for me. I believe in him. I know it's all true. But he won't get anything tonight? I know how to ward him off, perform a ritual that will protect me for this night. And you come tomorrow. I'll tell you what to do to win a few more nights. But remember, it won't help for long. Over time, he'll become angrier and hungrier, and then even that won't save you." The old woman finished speaking. And I, without saying a word, walked out onto the street where, lighting a cigarette, I tried to collect my thoughts. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were just in a nightmare and would wake up, and it would all end. Despite the wild fear of the impending horror, I still decided to do as the old woman instructed and went home. Waking up in the morning to the rays of sunlight breaking through my window, I realized that I was indeed alive. Nothing had happened to me. Karha didn't lie. I took a couple of weeks off work. After breakfast and finally taking a hot shower after so many days, I decided to go back to the village. Upon arriving, I encountered several bewildered and wild-eyed looks from the residents. Parents were ushering their children indoors, the elderly arriving in a state of despair, and whispers constantly passing between them. An inexplicable feeling of anxiety washed over me. Finally, approaching the witch's house, I knocked, but there was no response. After several attempts, I kicked the door with my foot, causing it to swing open, releasing a foul smell of herbs and iron into my face. Entering the room, I fell back and huddled into the corner, pulling my knees to my chest. The entire room was covered in blood and human debris. Various bowls, potions, herbs, and other nonsense were scattered everywhere. I could guess what had happened. The old woman was searching for something, but apparently couldn't find it. Everything in the house had been ransacked and scattered. Apparently, not finding something important, the old woman met her death. She couldn't defend herself from this creature. Crawling out of the house, I noticed another old woman in the neighboring plot. She was peering cautiously from behind the door. I made my way to her house on unsteady legs, wanting to ask what had happened, although I already knew the answer. The neighbor of the old woman explained. It got to her. Something terrible happened last night. I woke up to Valya's screams and animalistic growls. The noise echoed throughout the village. The men even peered into the window in the morning, turning pale as chalk. They got in the car and drove to the city for help. There's no communication here. The whole village knows what happened. We all believe in this devilry. Damn it, I muttered doomedly. So, all these people now await a monstrous death. Women and children too. No, I won't allow it. 3 innocent souls, that's the price. By all accounts, it's better than 100 lives of children and the elderly. That's what it seemed to me at that moment. I cannot and do not want to describe in detail what I did. After rolling through the seediest clubs in our small town, I first lured and then disposed of the trio of frivolous individuals. Despite everything, I felt deeply sorry for them, but too much was at stake. By midnight, they no longer breathed. I tried to do everything as quickly and painlessly as possible. In the end, having done everything as instructed, I simply fell to my knees and closed my eyes. At that moment, it was as if my soul left my body. I was next to those corpses, yet my consciousness was elsewhere. I heard and saw nothing. I felt nothing. I woke up behind bars. It was daytime. I don't know how much time I spent in that state, but all that awaited me afterward were endless interrogations. All those murders that happened before that moment, of course, were pinned on me. Then came the trials and investigations. After some time, they deemed me insane and threw me into where I am now, with my former boss. After finishing the narrative, I handed the scribbling to Stepan Viktorovich. He read through it for a long time, returning to what he had already read several times and scrutinizing every word. When he finished, he simply pocketed the notebook and left without saying a word. Obviously, he didn't believe me. Now he too regarded me as a deranged lunatic who had lost his mind trying to catch a killer. Honestly, I myself understood that I had committed a monstrous act, and it weighed heavily on me. But now, at least, that village can live peacefully, without fearing for their lives. At least until it comes again.